Welcome to Second Take, the show that takes a look at the issues behind the news. The South African metals and engineering sector continues to take strain, and the outlook is also currently clouded by rising geopolitical tensions. Terence Creamer is here to talk about the issue. Hi, Terence.
Hi, Chanel.
CIFSA has released a report highlighting some of the problems.
Yes, I think the report is quite frank and about how this whole metal and engineering sector, which includes mostly metal fabricated products, but also includes plastic products that they track, and they track it yearly, is really not recovering as to its average, production levels. So production fell again last year by 1.4%, but over sort of when it peaked in around 2007, since then every year it's been falling by about 1.3%. So it's in a sort of secular decline that's been going for over a decade. And then we obviously had that massive COVID shock. So there was a recovery from that shock, but we haven't got back to those production levels of pre-COVID in the metals and engineering sector, on those sectors that are, or subsectors that CIFSA tracks. So it's a difficult and a dire position actually. And they're warning, this was seen as a cyclical problem. And they're warning, with the fact that there hasn't been a production recovery, with capacity utilization now it's around 75%, and they're saying the sort of sweet spot should be around 85% capacity utilization. And with investment growing last year, but they're saying that's very deceptive, because if you look at where the money went, it was really about going into replacement capital or sustaining capital, rather than into anything growth or research and development or innovation. So that suggests that the long-term prospects, we're just sort of in a harvest mode, keeping it ticking over, but not really into a growth trajectory on the investment side. So that ultimately this could become a structural problem. And if it becomes a structural problem, obviously the capacity of what we're producing out of these subsectors will fall. But also the capability of that sector to do this myriad of manufacturing activity is going to come under pressure. So the picture is somewhat bleak, and it has been for some time, but I think it's a much more assertive and frank assessment that we got this time around.
There's also no immediate prospect of exporting our way out of this.
Yes, so 50%. But last year 45% of what this sector as a whole and the subsectors produced went into the export markets, into Africa, into Europe, into China, into the US. So now if you look at what you mentioned in the intro, the geopolitical temperature is not very favorable to growing trade at the moment. We know since the election of President Donald Trump, there's a sort of a protectionist mentality and a sort of a tariff enforcement and raising mentality that's come out. And we also know that we are somewhat on the back foot with regard to the Trump administration in terms of the way they view South Africa. So we've always had some favorable access under GSP as well as under AGOA into the US markets. So there's a preferential trade access, including for some of these products. There's a view now that our eligibility under AGOA is under real threat. So that's going to have an impact. But also there's tariffs that are going to come in now sort of in the next few weeks around metals and aluminium and steel products. And we'll have to see what impact that's going to have on South Africa. Because if we look at our trade to the US, it's about 12% of what this metals and engineering sector exports is to the US. And it's in those sort of basic iron and steel and sort of non-ferrous products, aluminium products. So those tariffs are possibly going to bite. We'll have to see though, because they've got the AGOA access, whether that's sort of offsets it or not. So there's that sort of channel and that growth. Even though we have in this sector, the balance of trade is in the US favor, which is something that Donald Trump looks at very closely. Looks at whether the balance of trade is in America's favor or not. In this case, it is, but we're seeing a threat there. And obviously with China, That's a big market that we export to. But on the whole, there the balance of trade is very much in favour of China. And if you look at both the pace and the scale, so the pace of growth is in favour of China, and the scale of growth is massively in favour of China. I think it's about in this subsector or this sector and across the subsectors, about 188 billion trade deficit in favour of China. So it's not clear that we can massively ramp up our trade to China to recover from what might happen in the US. And then if you look at Europe, which is a major export market for these sectors, there we've got the carbon border adjustment mechanisms coming in. Look, they'll be phased in over time, but it's a threat to our competitiveness of the trade from these sectors. So those three, and then what has helped somewhat in the last few years is our growth into the African market. But overall, there's a feeling that unless domestic economy starts growing again and absorbing more of these products, particularly through an concerted infrastructure spend that is actually delivered, not just announced. We have these many announcements every year and associated with the budget and then the provincial budgets, but they don't seem to actually actualize. There's always a delay. Unless that starts happening, that's the threat. That cyclical trend is going to become structural, and we lose capacity and, more worryingly, capability in these sectors and subsectors.
Then there is the added uncertainty created by the closure of ArcelorMittal South Africa's longs business.
Yes, so much of the 1.4% reduction in output last year wasn't really at the upstream level. It was the downstream, the machinery, the fabricated product type level. But now if we have a major dislodgement of production out of Newcastle, for instance, that is going to probably be in the 2025 figures. So it does cloud everything. And I think the big concern there is that ArcelorMittal's Newcastle and also with the Highveld plant and with what happens at Vereeniging produces products for the downstream industry that can't easily be replaced. Well, they can't be replaced domestically from the mini mills. Some of it can, but most of it can't. And then to get your orders in, from the rest of the world takes some time. So there's a concern that there's a dislocation here. If we don't get that input into, say, a component that's going into the automotive industry, will the automotive industry wait and let that component now be produced using imported steel, still from the same component manufacturers locally, or will that component manufacturer be forced to actually start importing the final product? So this could be very, very, very bad for our localization trajectory that we've been on in the automotive sector, for instance. Then obviously we've got this potential low-hanging fruit of the grid infrastructure expansion. What impact is not having some of this capacity upstream going to have on the downstream ability to produce? It's not 100% clear, but there's a number of headwinds that could emerge as a result of the closure of AMSA.
Thank you. That's the Second Take show for this week. Thank you for watching, and join us again next time for more news analysis. Also, don't forget to listen to the audio version of our Engineering News Daily email newsletter.